Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another of the series of getting to know an opposition fan or podcast. And I've got something very rare in this community. I'm not the only foreigner. So some of you may think I'm the only non-Aussie, but we do have another fantastic gentleman, Big Donnie from Donnie Disposals. He does wonderful stuff over there. So the links are in the description, but he is also a super fan of the Sydney Swans. So welcome to you, Donnie, all the way from the United States of America.
Thank you for having me on. It's always good to hear somebody that doesn't have an Australian accent that loves footy. So this is fascinating for me.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's rare in the AFL community. We now have a Pom and an American talking about the great game. It's almost like the UN AFL YouTube now.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, it's fantastic as an American who's been getting into it. And I'm not the only podcast over here. We've got four different podcasts that I know that I am aware of for Aussie rules, but I'm one of the for me this is one of those that it's a great community. Absolutely love the community, and I love being able to talk with podcasts from all of the different clubs because I think in the long run we all love footy, we all love watching footy, we all love talking footy. So why not work with each other?
Mate, I agree, 100% agree, and that's why I've been doing this on my own for about a year and a bit. Most people know me from Blue Abroad, and I see all of you, and I thought, you know what, I usually do this myself, do Sydney's preview and review, and I thought, let's get fans to do it for me, and I maybe hopefully learn something, and I think it's a great pillar, this video, to be honest, for Australia, because we call it Australian Football League in Australian rules footy, just proves that this has a global appeal as well.
100%. And the fact that the sport is growing, and I wish more Australians knew about it, is the fact that there's leagues in England, there's leagues in the US, there's leagues in Canada, there's leagues in China, there's leagues in Japan. So this sport, though it may still be small when it comes to the total number of people playing it, this is starting to become a sport that I think a lot more people are playing, a lot more people are enjoying. So to be able to spread this around, not only here but also back in Australia, showing the passion, I think is nothing but good.
And I think one of the big questions that wasn't on my run sheet, but I'm always fascinated with, we know we've got a famous American here, Mason Cox. Does Mason Cox get a lot of publicity in the States? Has that really brought the game to you guys?
No, unfortunately, he does not. As I've said to another podcast, I said Mason Cox for 99.9% of Americans, he could pop out of your Wheaties and you'd have no idea who he is because there's just no coverage. Unfortunately, he's very big in the USAFL community because we all know, we all watch footy, we all play footy, so we all know who Mason Cox is. In fact, I actually got to meet the great man at Nationals this year, shook his hand and thanked him for everything that he's done at Nationals this year. But once he leaves Nationals, there's nobody that knows him because it's just not, unfortunately, it's just not as as well known here in the States. We're doing everything that we can, but unfortunately the big man is, once he leaves any type of footy atmosphere, he becomes just another really tall guy that people are like, he must play basketball.
That's a shame. I mean, it's something that I've often thought. I know the Americans are spending a lot of money in creating their own T20 league in cricket. So there's a lot of, obviously, Americans do what Americans do. They spend a lot of money and make fantastic venues. And that's the big negative, I think, for Australians. Where would we play footy in America? There's no cricket grounds because they're the oval shaped ones. I do have a hope that one day we do see an international game because I think I always have this vision going to Texas, who are massive, get behind your own. The Texans are very raucous. I have that vision of a Collingwood Carlton game in the off season in Dallas or something like that. And I think it would be huge and really draw the Americans' eyes because Americans do get behind obscure sports, I've got to say, when you go over there.
100% agree. And I've said this on another podcast before, and unfortunately, this may ruffle some feathers of some people, but I honestly think the best way that you could have expanded the sport over here was gimmicked out really, really badly, and that was AFLX. Because AFLX would have been perfect. 9 to 10 aside on 100-yard field. You could use Jerry World, as you said, 100,000. You wouldn't have to adjust anything. You wouldn't have to take any stands. All you have to do is just make sure that you have the width to be able to play the game, say in like a rugby pitch, which I think you could do on Jerry World, and you could play a 10-a-side game in Jerry World and get 100,000 there. So this is one of those where I think AFLX, as much as most of the traditionalists and some people said it was gimmicked, that all this money was spent, they gimmicked it so badly. I think it ruined a perfect opportunity to come over here and play exhibition games in Dallas, in New York, in San Francisco, because you have perfect stadiums that would have fit perfectly. You could get the poles in the ground and you could play 10-a-side footy and show the spectacular game in all of its glory and just a tiny bit of a smaller sample size. And I think it could have blown up because we love physicality and we love scoring, two things that footy has a lot of.
I'm 100% agree. I remember when AFLX was here, I was like, this is something you put on at Wembley Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you know what I mean? And you bring the best players over and you give them that little taster. I remember the Americans sending us, we had the European NFL, which wasn't successful, but it did get a lot of eyes in it. And then we had the indoor footy that started to come from the States. And then suddenly the Americans, Jacksonville, said, right, London's going to be our second home. And they get huge support. And it was because they bite-sized fed us a game we weren't familiar with. I've always thought the AFL going to China was the weirdest thing, purely because soccer has an issue because the Chinese culture doesn't like physicality. It doesn't like that contact. It's not what they look for. So I've always said America and England are probably the two countries that all their national sports, bar maybe cricket and baseball, are physically contested. They are contact. It's very watered down AFL. So it's all the nice things. That's why I like footy, scoring and big hits. All the good things from soccer are in one game with more. So for you guys, I think it's a real easy sell.
Exactly. And especially in a state like Texas that loves its high school gridiron football. I think the physicality of the game, and you can, and anybody that's on here, go on YouTube and find reaction videos of Americans watching AFL. They watch the biggest hits videos and you could see their brains explode because they can't believe guys with no pads are hitting each other as physically as some of these AFL hits. And it's fascinating to watch. And the best part is that you can reach out to them and be like, hey, there's a league here in the States. And it's a way to start because if you get more and more eyes on it, it can explode. And the other thing is there's 330 million people in the States. And one of the podcasters over here, Craig Wessels, a Yank on the Footy, said if you get 10% of the US, that's 3.3 million people. Just that there is a significant amount to work with just to start off with. You're not going to get all of it because there's too many. Football and gridiron football and basketball are the two heavyweights. They're always going to get the majority of the athletes, but there are tons of athletes that go collegiate and then don't play professional. If you could get them into academies and get them into ways to where they could teach the games, I think the U.S. could be a feeder system to give athletes to the AFL to expand the game and to give us better athletes and a better product in the long run. It's, do they have the money and do they have the time to put into some of these athletes that are super athletic, super talented, and will be sponges if you try to teach them this incredible game?
Oh, and hopefully we could have a situation where we have a World Cup. I mean, I dream of seeing an England AFL team run out and being able to get behind them, on a national, highly professional level. And I think that would be grouse for the game. I mean, I know there is the AFL World Cup, but obviously the best nation in the world, Australia, doesn't partake in that because it would be
the International Cup, which I believe they're going to try to do next year again. Still kind of up in the air. I think it's going to be up in Queensland, I believe, in 2024. So I'll keep you updated onto that. I'm always seeing the International Cup updates, but it's not professional, so it's still pretty much amateur, but it's still worth going because you get to see there's some sides. Ireland and New Zealand are usually really, really good. Papua New Guinea is always good. The Americans, the Canadians are usually solid. And then you get teams India, China, Japan that are over there that it's still growing there too, which is always fascinating as well.
Well, I mean, I will run the England cheer squad should England get there. I'll bring a Barmy Army atmosphere up to Queensland with me. But your mighty Swans, obviously, we're here to talk about them. And they got so close last year, and they were a team I was really hot on at the start and doing my previews. I think they were my smoky to win the flag. I was really hot on how you've built your list. Last year, you got so close, and it felt like a lot of teams making the finals kind of took the wind out of your sails, making the granny. You'd maybe had your grand final elsewhere. But how did you feel about that year? Now we've had 3 months to digest. How did you think that season went?
Well, in all, I mean, it's hard to say that getting to a grand final is a not successful season, because it was still a very successful season. I'm still and maybe you almost come off a little bit more optimistic than I was. I was still looking to see us barely make the top 4 if we were going to, because they're still young. There's still such a young core. I mean, you've got a ton of guys that are under 25 with under 200, with under 100 games, 100 or 150 games. So there's still a lot of youth on this team. Yes, you've got your old heads. You've got your Joey Kennedy's, unfortunately, how his career ended this year. I feel horrible for him. You still got Luke Parker. You've still got Dane Rampion. You still got Lance Franklin. But if you take those guys off the field, this is on primarily 25 and under team. They're so young. They're so talented. But because they're young, they're prone to inconsistencies, which is what I kind of saw them being, is that 4th, 5th, 6th, maybe be competitive, maybe get to a preliminary final, and if they're lucky, get to a grand final. So as the second half of the season, like the Melbourne game at the MCG during the regular season where they won, you could kind of start feeling the fan base go, we might have something here. And you had a couple of games were really iffy. The Essendon game, the second game against Essendon that they dropped, you could kind of tell everybody went, whoa, nobody expected that. And then it was like that little fire underneath them, and everything changed. Their pressure rating went up. They started absolutely smothering teams, and they went into the finals. And I kept telling people, I said, don't sleep on them against Melbourne. Don't sleep on them against Melbourne. And every pundit I kept hearing saying, Melbourne's too good. Melbourne's too good. I go, if you look at Melbourne's record after that game against Sydney, they were a 500 ball club. They had only won, they had won half the games that they had lost. So I knew they could win that one. The Collingwood game, I was confident, but Collingwood again was this enigma that they were a zombie. You could never kill them. You could never fully put them in the ground. The Swans survived, and I knew going into that grand final week, there was only one way the Swans could win, and they had to get up on the Cats early. They had to make the Cats have to chase them. And when the Cats got that big lead, I went, oh, crud. And it was over. The Cats were just too good. The Swans had their worst possible game, the worst possible time. So in all, I was very happy with this season. I can't be negative. Yes, it stinks to lose a grand final, but you get to the preliminary final, you get to the grand final. Only 2 teams get there every year. So as long as you're one of them, yeah, you lose but there's a ton of positives to take out of this season.
I think you've nailed it. And I thought the semi-final was, I think you nailed Collingwood's description. They are like a zombie. I think I upset Collingwood fans. I called them like a cockroach. Like you can completely maim them. You can completely maim them, but somehow they survive. Do you know what I mean? You can cut their arms off, their legs off, their head off, but that cockroach carries on, and you have to make sure it's dead. And that game, I thought, was one of the best games of the year. It was a proper finals game, and I did have a worry for the Sydney after that game, because I thought they've worked so hard to finally slay the side that can't be slayed. And unfortunately, like you say, Geelong kind of had a day out, didn't they? And but no shame to Sydney, because they're a young list, and hopefully that pain turns into glory in the years down the track.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I've heard some people say sometimes you got to lose a grand final to win one. So I mean, if you take that motto, I mean, I think Sydney's done it. They had the loss. They'll learn from it. And again, they're still very very young, and it's another year into their youngsters. I mean, Chad Warner had a season out. I mean, when you've got Damian Barrett, one of the huge media guys in AFL saying he believes Chad Warner will win a Brownlow in the next 5 years. That's incredible praise, because that's not something people hand out. Tommy Papley had a great season, and he missed the first 6 games of the season with a hamstring injury. James Rowbottom, another undersized young midfielder, kind of solidified himself as that great stable midfielder. Luke Parker has Luke Parker. Isaac Heaney and Callum Mills both make all Australian. So there were so many positives out of this Sydney season. And we're not even talking about Buddy kicking 1,000 this year, which, I mean, is an accomplishment in and of itself, considering, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's going to happen again. The way footy is played, the way these athletes are expended and expelled as quickly as they are, it is damn near impossible for you to kick 100, let alone kick 1,000 in a career. He's 18 seasoned in. Very rarely do many guys get that deep into their career. So we could have that day when Buddy kicked 1,000 seen the last ever 1,000 goal kicker in AFL as we know it.
Mate, I think that is something that isn't talked about enough. I think you're looking now just on the average of the last couple of Coleman winners. They've probably got to have a 25-year career to even get to 1,000, let alone surpass it. And when you're talking them numbers in this type of game, it's almost impossible, isn't it? Like physically, there's no way a human could play this game for 25 years.
No, it's darn near impossible unless there's a massive rule change. Like if they changed it back to you can only play man-to-man defense, you can't go to these grid zone defenses that a lot of clubs are utilizing nowadays. Until they go back to that, which was primarily what they played in the 80s when you saw guys like Dermot Brereton and Chief and then kicking 120 goals a season, unless those come back, which I highly doubt, because there's so much science, there's so much structure to sport, to coaching nowadays, especially in footy, I just don't see it happening. Like you're going to see Coleman winner. I wouldn't shock me in the next 10 years. You see a Coleman winner kick 50 and that's it. Would not shock me a bit.
No, I'm with you. I mean, we've seen Carlton, Charlie Curnow and Harry. Do you know what I mean? And they're very, like, it's one of them things that you hear people say on opposition fans, oh, they wouldn't have made top 10 20 years ago with them numbers. It's going to get lower. Goals are going to become, they're a lot more spread round as well. You start to see as well now a lot of midfielders coming up. We saw Cripps last year. He was at one point our second leading goal kicker. It's starting to be spread as well. These key forwards aren't like they were back in even the early noughties. It's the guy you kick to. Now we're starting to spread them around. Got lists have 3 key forwards. So it's a crazy time. And Buddy, I agree with you. We'll probably look back at that moment and be like, the good old days.
Yeah, well, we'll look back at it and go, at least we celebrated it, because this could be the last time ever. And it's bittersweet because it was such a cool moment. It's so great for the game, but it is sad because you know that you had to kind of enjoy it because you may never see it again. I mean, I think the 100 goal mark is a lot more possible, but the getting to 1,000, it's just so difficult because of the wear and tear on the body, especially with the high performance the footy players are nowadays. They're almost more athletes than they are footballers. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a 100-goal season, but like I don't think we'll ever see. I even think a 100-goal season is almost 99.9% never going to happen. I think we're going to start to get excited when people cross 50. It's not going to be the 100 anymore.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me.
but going in to the trade period, I remember doing my trade previews and saying that I thought Sydney had 2 options. They either stick with what they've got and they just do top up, or they go out and maybe buy a brand name to try and take these plethora of kids to the next level. And you went the first way. You didn't really do much. You brought in Aaron Francis. Were you expecting you guys to stick with the list, or did you hope to see maybe a brand name or some more players come in to back up that healthy list?
I was one of those, and it really depends on what Swans fan you talk to. I was one of those. I think I love the list. I was really looking at Kinnear Beatson, the list manager, has always been a genius to me because he always finds a way to do things just a tiny bit different. And the Swans are known for taking what some people would say is scraps from other teams and making them into players. I mean, Paddy McCartan this last year, he comes off the scrap heap of St. Kilda. He's got all these concussion issues, can't do anything. He comes over, he becomes one of the best intercept markers in the entire competition. So I love the addition of Aaron Francis because he gives us a swing player that Sam Reed has been for the longest time. And again, if you ask many Swans fans, Sam Reed is the bane of Swans fans' existence because when he goes forward, he can't kick goals, but he's a good defender with great hands. So he's one of those, he's on the list, but he's a bugaboo for some people. So this year, him playing as well as he did, you could see people as he made more and more of a positive impact. You saw more fans go less of darn you, Sam Reed, to thank you, Sam Reed. It was the funniest thing to watch some of the Swans boards that I pay attention to. So I love the Aaron Francis addition. I think he brings more depth. I think he's going to be utilized more in the defensive role because our defense has been a little undersized. Tommy McCartan can handle the big guys at full forward, but he is undersized. I mean, when you play Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow of Carlton, when you play Tommy Hawkins of Geelong, when you play oh gosh, I'm totally brain farting, the big guy at Dixon at Port, you need that bigger body, kind of still athletic center back or full back. Tommy McCartan can do it. He's just undersized. If he starts getting outmanned, it can be a long day for the Sydney defense if their center forward, their full forward is getting loose. So having Aaron Francis being another intercept type of marker you can put back there with some height, I think is a good thing. I wasn't expecting a huge name. There were people that wanted it. I loved what we have because there's just so much youth and so much depth. I mean, we have a guy like Logan McDonald that if you take him out of Sydney and you put him on several of the clubs throughout the league, he's probably a starting full forward. But because Buddy is in Sydney, Logan McDonald's having a little bit of issues getting on the park, and you don't always want a lot of talls at forward. So it's one of those where we've got a plethora of young talent that I think we just need to continue to keep. We need to continue to develop and not rush them onto the field because, I mean, 2020, we had to play a lot of youth because there just wasn't the talent. There was a ton of injuries to our big guys that our youth had to play. And we're kind of seeing the rewards of that now, of them playing in 20, because now they're starting to get valuable minutes on a good side, and they're learning better and better habits. So it was an interesting interesting trade period for me because I wasn't expecting much. I wasn't even expecting the Francis trade. So the Francis trade is a bonus for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you nailed it. And I like Francis. I thought when you've got the McCartan guys as well, I think with McCartan, he has become one of the best intercepts. But I would say it would be due diligent to have a backup as well and have someone you can throw in because I say it about Charlie Curnow at Carlton. Yes, he's played the whole year, but do remember we haven't seen him for 2 years. So you've always got to have it in your back of your mind. Lightning doesn't want to strike twice, but if it does, what do you do? And I thought Aaron Francis gives that option. If worst case scenario and he has to have a 2-4 week break, Aaron Francis can come in. He can maybe structure a little bit differently, but you have got an AFL ready defender ready to take his place. You're not playing one of these kids. I think the other sad thing as well is Kennedy retiring. That is sad for a guy like me who's been here for 11, 12 years now. He's a staple of what I expect to see every week, particularly on Sydney's list. How did you feel saying goodbye to a folk hero?
Joey Kennedy, how much the praise has for him, his consistency and his class on the field has been something I have raved about. And the fact that he was a father-son for Hawthorn and never really worked out at Hawthorn, came up to Sydney and kind of, he found his spot. And we absolutely love Joey. It was sad to see that the hamstring injury kind of keep him from being that potential Medi sub for the grand final to at least have that, maybe that go home factor of get him a flag potentially in his retirement year. So he'll be missed. You could definitely tell that I think his style of game was starting to wane a little bit this year. He couldn't really find a spot. You couldn't really put him at the halfback line because he didn't have the pace. A lot of the game nowadays, the halfback flankers and the halfbacks have to be quick, they have to be speedy and great with the ball. All that Joey is not. Joey, as great a ball movement as he is, quick is not in his vocabulary. I love him to death, but he's not. He's a bullish inside mid who gets the ball out to his wings, and then they do the speed. He does the rough and tumble stuff. A lot like what George Hewitt did for Carlton, another Swans guy. I have to throw that out there. But I love that he came to Carlton. I think he found himself a perfect place there. So all respect and love. There's definitely a few Swans fans that are sad he left, but I'm happy he ended up somewhere like that. It'll be very interesting. I hope he gets a coaching job at Sydney because I think he has so much knowledge and so much experience. I think the youthful midfielders, I think, will benefit from having him around because I know he even coached in a couple of games due to some COVID issues this season. He had to put the headset on at least once and be in the box with Horse. So it'd be fascinating to see. I hope so. I really hope he stays with the club because he was a warrior for us and we thoroughly enjoy him. He'll be missed. He'll be missed for sure.
It's always sad to see these legends go, and I think with that young midfield core, what better man to pass on his knowledge as well? Because I think you've nailed it there. I think he'll be missed around at the club, and we wish him well. But I mean, moving forward into the draft, you were kind of you played two roles. I thought you had a very good draft, but I enjoyed the fact Sydney bullied teams in the draft. They were the annoying little brother in the draft, and I enjoyed watching it. It was something I've been begging AFL clubs to do. Stop being nice and start ruffling feathers. And you ruffled GWS's feathers quite a few times in that draft.
It'll be very interesting for me because I remember I was doing something for my podcast and did not watch the draft the day of. And I kept seeing, and I'm on a couple of Twitter message boards, and they just the talk the entire time that they bid on GWS, and again, I've seen some interviews with Kinnear Beatson, our list manager, and if you listen to him and you completely believe him, which again, some clubs may not completely believe Kinnear Beatson, everybody that they bid for, they wanted. They weren't trying to play. I don't think they were trying to play games. I think they legitimately wanted Roaston because he was a Sydney product. He was a Giants Academy kid. And GWS didn't lose much. They lost the next pick. So it wasn't like they lost a ton. They had to bid maybe a pick or two earlier than they probably were expecting. The Adelaide one, it depends on who you talk to. Again, Beatson said that they had Macaulay high on their board. Some people think that it was a little bit of, hey, Adelaide, you screwed us with the Jordan Dawson, so we're going to get you back a little bit by bidding on your father-son academy that most people thought was probably going to be in the 30s at 18. So it was very fascinating. Again, I don't know the truth. Again, the truth could be somewhere in between. Kinnear Beatson's, we had him high, and we decided to mess with Adelaide by bidding early on a guy that was probably a 30s pick. And then they traded because if I remember correctly, talking with some people, there's at least 2 academy kids that Sydney wants to keep that are in next year's draft. They're not like top 10 picks, but they're going to be late first round, early second. So they're going to need several picks to be able to retain them. So that's why they ended up trading with Hawthorn and got a second and a third round for next year's draft pick. So and then they draft a late kid, the Constantini kid, who everybody says is a Papley clone, which I thought was hilarious because Papley's still there. Papley is very much he's one of those guys that you either love him or you hate him. You love him when he's on your team because he pesters the shit out of everybody, but you hate him on opposing teams because he's good and he gets under your skin. So having his kind of air in the ranks as another pressure player up forward, it will be fascinating to see. But I thought the Swans drafted. I'm not 100% sure on every single one of these kids. I'm still doing some research for my podcast, which we'll probably do here in a few weeks on that. But I mean, Kinnear Beatson is one of the best list managers in the entire competition, so I trust him. So
I loved what you did, and I think we'll never know what Sydney, if they're being honest. I don't, for the life of me, believe they wanted them. I actually gave them full respect because I think it's about time some AFL clubs do force teams to buy their father sons early. Because what often happens, particularly with these academy players, do you know what I mean? Before the rules changed, his teams just bid on another player, and ended up having 2 first rounders. I like the fact that you guys made teams stay honest, and you effectively ruined Adelaide's draft night, which made me laugh a little bit. I've got to say, I was doing the watch along, and I was like, I bet they didn't expect that. That's ruined their afternoon. So well done, Sydney.
Yeah, well, I knew that I knew that one was going to be interesting because again, the Jordan Dawson trade was everything that I had saw on most of the chat boards was like, I was like, that was probably for Jordan Dawson, and I go, well, you could make that claim. I don't know 100% no, but it's definitely one of those you could see that it's, hey, we didn't like how you kind of negotiated the Jordan Dawson trade. This is how we're going to kind of, hey, this is your reality check. Maybe you may not want to tick us off. But then, as I saw somebody online said, is that the bad part is with 2 Sydney Academy kids, who knows if somebody plays dirty poker next year. So it'll be very interesting for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Sydney were one of my favourites for someone to do a trade with because we discussed on here and Blue Abroad quite extensively. You've got some Sydney guys coming through next year, so I didn't think you needed the picks, and I didn't think priority is going into the draft anymore for you guys as well. And I did mention Sydney have this horrible habit of taking a guy at 40, 50, and he's like the 10th best player in that year's draft, and you're like, how have they done that? Do you know what I mean? So I liked it. And Constante, you've talked about him at the start of the show. Papley clone is a fair assessment. I think the thought of him learning off probably one of the best undersized high half forwards, but then a deadly pocket. I think he's terrifying for the AFL. I actually looked at that pick and thought, oh, I don't want Sydney to have them 2 guys together. That is going to be a nightmare to defend.
Well, and speaking of that, as you said, is that one of the people that I discussed for one of the great young midfielders was kind of that diamond in the rough. I mean, Chad Warner was pick 38 or something or odd his draft year out of WA. I mean, 37 teams could have picked him. They didn't pick him. He goes to the Swans. He goes to the Swans, and I still think there's still some people that think he's an academy player. No, he was a WA draft pick, and Sydney they let him develop under Luke Parker and Jared McVeigh and under Joey Kennedy. And look what he's done the last 2 seasons. He started to become this elite midfielder. And as I said, Damian Barrett's now saying he's got a possibility of being a Brownlow medalist. He was after 35 pick. So it's one of the reasons why I love Kinnear Beatson, because he finds these diamonds in the rough sometimes that you're just like, whoa, he was in the draft and he was taken where? You kind of astonished that he finds these diamond in the rough kids and they turn out really, really well. I don't know if it's culture. I don't know if it's his genius or if it's just something where he just has a gut feeling and it just turns out right. I don't know.
You have an uncanny knack. And I remember doing the live watch along with Sydney, and we talked about you and Geelong both have this habit of taking a guy plus 30 and in the rookie draft, some people going, who the hell's this kid? And then in 2 years' time, you know who the hell that kid is. And there was quite a few this year. I thought you did as well. Cooper Vickery is one that you took a bit later after that draft. And he's a guy that I just look at and I think, yeah, okay, this guy's going to be annoying. He's going to be a good side. Caleb Mitchell, hard running winger. But the one that I do want to just talk about a little bit is I've got an obsession on this show with Tasmanians, and Cam Owen I couldn't believe Cam Owen slid that far. And he's definitely a guy that I am looking at as a guy that he's going to in 3 or 4 years, maybe a top level ruckman. And everyone's going to be like, how did we let him go to a rookie draft?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting because the Swans ruck stocks are kind of are really at a very kind of a purgatory, because I mean the ruck Jesus that is Hickey. I mean, he doesn't have many seasons left, as much as we absolutely love him. And again, he's been another one of those guys that the forever journeyman player, played in 4 different states, and he's playing his best footy at Sydney in his oldest age. So it's this weird situation. And then we had with Sam Naismith, we delisted because he's had all his ACL injuries. Unfortunately, sometimes it just happens. But we needed that young ruckman because Pete Ladham's the jury's still out on him, and some Sydney fans are still looking at the trade with Port Adelaide going, why did we trade for this flog? Like I've legitimately have heard some fans, they're not happy with him after the utter brain fade that he had in the VFL game that cost him a 3-game suspension. So for them to pick up a young ruckman, which I'm not surprised, they had another young ruckman who I think was a rugby league kid that's like up there, but he's just, I don't know if he's not developing or if he's one of those 3 or 4 year rookie draft type of kids. So we'll have to see. Again, the rookie draft has been really good for the Swans. What was it? I saw something, they were talking about the grand final. They said, was it three players from the Sydney backline this year were rookie draft players? Dane Rampy, Jake Lloyd, and Robbie Fox. And you could somewhat consider Paddy McCartan a rookie draft because he was a supplementary draft pick, even though he was first. He was a supplementary pick for the Swans going into this season as well. So 4 of their 6 defenders were supplemental / rookie draft kids. They were not not elite level players that were drafted in the high levels by the Swans. So it was kind of, it's insane what they've done with some of these smaller drafts and found a way to make them into AFL superstars.
Mate, I agree with you. And like Jaden McGaw as well was a guy you took in that rookie draft as well, who is a crafty little player. And he was as high as 25 to 40 on most draft boards. And was one of the guys I remember at the end was on the list of people we talked about of, I can't believe no one's taken a punt on him. And then you guys came out and I had a little grin to myself going, Sydney doing Sydney things here. They've taken him at a risk-free thing and guaranteed this guy in 3 years is going to kick 4 goals against Carlton to knock us out of a prelim. Can't wait for this to happen. I've seen this script before. So very good. And like you say, Kinnear is a genius. And whatever you feed them in Sydney, they seem to always book where they've been drafted at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing too is just I hate coming down to something so simple. I think it's the culture. I think a lot of guys like playing in the culture because it's been something that everybody talks about, the Bloods culture, and it's very fascinating to hear people talk about it that are in the club, because they're like, they asked Hickey after one of the finals, they were like, what's different from their 3 other clubs? And he goes, the people. He goes, the people in this club, they care. They do everything they can to make you the best possible player you can be. And I honestly think that's it. Like I legit, like, it's not this magic wand of Kinnear beats. And I think he picks the right guys, and then the club's coaches and the environment that they put him in allows these young men to succeed. It's this really weird thing. You can't put your finger on it. You can't specifically point to one thing. It's the culture of this entire club and everything that's kind of involved with it, I think is the reason why this club has been as successful as it has been.
I think you've nailed it. I think the Bloods culture is a big part of it. I think Sydney, even when they're winning or losing, they have a sense of calm about them. I always think, coming out of your club, there doesn't seem to ever be a panic, whether you win, lose, or draw. And I think that's a huge testament. I think you see that in sport worldwide from good clubs, that it's kind of like that they expect it, they're on it, there's no rubbish in the media, the coaches are calm, the players look assured, and that's why it leads me on to 2023. Obviously, we've seen a lot of sides go into a final and be shell-shocked. GWS springs to mind. They were shell-shocked. Adelaide was shell-shocked, and we never saw them again. I get the impression with Sydney that that's not going to happen. And I get the impression Sydney are going to do it. And I look at Geelong. Geelong beat in the semi-finals Brisbane by 70. So they were already in a different realm. I don't know what Geelong were playing a different sport in the finals. How do you see 2023 going? What is your expectations?
I try not to have expectations because it's one of those that I think if you have an expectations, it's much easier to be disappointed than it is to be put your expectations a little lower. I always go into it as, can they be better than they were this year? Yes, they can. I mean, you can always be, it's pie in the sky. It's never going to happen. 22-0 after, or 23-0 because of gather round this year. Yeah. Is it possible? Yes. Will it happen? Probably not. So there's always room for improvement. I still think this is a young side. It is inconsistent. The pressure club that you saw at the end of the year was not the same Sydney that it was at the start of the season. So can they put that pressure that they did for those last 9 weeks of the season going into the grand final? Can they do it for an entire 22-23 game season this year? I think it's possible. With the youth and the depth that I think Sydney is building, I think this is going to be their brand. They're going to be this high pressure, up forward type of team that you just can't breathe if you make a mistake, because they're going to be all over you like flies on you know what. So honestly, I think the Swans can get right back to, I think they could be a top 4 side. I think they can get to another grand final, but I don't expect it, because I always want to be sure to know that there's always got to be room for what happened if Buddy goes down, what happens if Luke Parker goes down, what happens if Tommy Papley hurts a hamstring, what happens if injuries, what is the backup to that? Because if you expect something, you never know what kind of weird, wacky injuries. Again, the AFL can have some weird injuries, ACLs can happen. So I never expect it. Do I think it can happen? Yes. I think the Swans can get back to a grand final. I think they can even win a grand final this year. I don't expect it. I hope. I don't expect.
Mate, the H word is the most dangerous word in the human language, I've got to say.
Especially for sport.
It's a very dangerous thing. But no, I feel it. And especially the injuries. As a Carlton fan, tell you what, injuries are my favourite word. I love seeing that on an article. But no, I'm quite bullish about you guys. I think I agree with you. I think I look at Geelong and think that they're like the Greek Empire at the moment. They just keep churning it out. And I think there's a few little empires coming around. I think Sydney, Carlton, Fremantle, they're starting to build something. And I think one of us three will be the side that takes it off them eventually and becomes the new consistent workhorse. And I agree. I think Sydney, that they are a side that they play a brand of football that's not only attractive, but it's quite deadly as well. It's quite deadly to watch.
I agree. And I'm with you. I think Fremantle, Carlton, and Sydney are the 3 sides that I remember saying at the end of the year ago, there's youth, there's experience, there's talent, and there's hunger. And all of these sides, again, Fremantle, I'm worried with a few of their losses because they lost a lot of experience. It'll be interesting to see how they go. Luke Jackson will be fast. I'm thoroughly fascinated to see how they go. But and I know I'm on a Carlton show. I'll give you guys credit. You guys were the team I was the most afraid of if you got to the finals, because there was just this wave of fan expectation and supporters that if you get to the finals, there's not a single Carlton game that isn't going to be sold out, because every Carlton fan that can get tickets are going to go. So as much as it sucked you guys didn't make it, I think that's going to put a fire in Carlton's belly. Carlton is Carlton is my scary team this season outside of Sydney and Geelong. You guys are the side I'm the most scared for, because if you guys play the best type of footy you can, you guys are really, really good. Harry Mackay and your forward line, it is damn near impossible to stop if you're on it. The question is, can you maintain what you did last year? Second year, will you have a sophomore slump? That'll be the biggest question. It's the same thing with the Swans. Could you have a slump or a regression from the season before? So I go into this season extremely intrigued, because there's a lot of sides. There is a lot of sides going into this season can make finals. I think this could be one of the most competitive AFL seasons in a long time.
I agree. I looked at the draw and I was thinking I could see, like, I remember playing Melbourne round 21, round 20, and if we beat them, they'd go down to 10th. If they won, they'd go to 2nd. And I was just thinking, this is crazy. We've got 2 weeks to go. Do you know what I mean? And like, we could technically knock Melbourne technically out of finals, or they could have a double chance. It's balmy how the league is getting, and I think next year I'm looking at them round 23 fixtures, round 22, and thinking potentially in my mind I've got 14 sides that potentially could make up the 8, and I think how exciting is that going to be? Because that's usually when you see good sides lose games. Do you know what I mean? That they're tired, they're starting to have one mind on a final, so they're starting to rest players. Niggles are happening, so they're trying to get them right for 3 weeks' time. I think this could be a season that could be dramatic to heck.
Oh yeah, especially this is the season where the North Melbournes, the GWSs, the Sydney, the St Kildas, and the Essendons, I think, could make or break who makes finals, because I think Hawthorn, North Melbourne, Essendon, and GWS, I think, are going to be the bottom 4. So those are going to be the teams that you can't lose to. The others, there's a possibility. Will Essendon have a bump or not? That's the biggest question. Collingwood, they're an enigma to me, because can they do that next year like they did this year? That'll be fascinating to see. The Western Bulldogs, Brisbane Lions are the other one, just like Geelong, that their offseason was insane this year. Picking up, they get Dunkley from the Western Bulldogs, you get all of their father sons, Ashcroft, Jesper Fletcher, and you get Connor McKenna. They instantly, just again, this is on paper again, we don't know, instantly put themselves in the flag contendership with just their off-season moves. And again, Hipwood will be fully healthy. We'll have to see how it goes. Does Danaher take another step up? How does Charlie Cameron go on? How does some of the changes go there? So this is a scary season next year, because I agree with you. I think there's 14 sides that could all make finals if things go the right way. This could be an absolutely mental last 5 weeks and 5 rounds of the season.
Mate, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be probably one of the best on paper already. Shapes up to be the most exciting season, and I think it makes a change. Makes a change, doesn't it? Because usually by round 20, 7 teams are sewn in and 4 teams are fighting for that last spot. I think this year we could have a situation where second, with 3 weeks to go, potentially could miss the finals if they lose all 3 games and results go against them. And I think you've nailed it. I think North Melbourne are that side that are going to be the death rattle with Clarkson there. I think they're going to be that side that are probably going to pride themselves in the last 4 weeks of ruining someone's year. And I wouldn't want to play North Melbourne in the last 4 or 5 weeks. I've just got a feeling that they'll step up and they'll upset sides.
Yep. It's the perfect storm is if you get a bottom 4 side in the last 2 or 3 weeks and you know that you're most likely going to make the finals. That's the danger game, because they're coming in, they're playing for pride, they're playing to try to improve their season, and you're taking them lightly. It'll be fascinating watching come seeing that the bottom 4, I think, are going to make or break the 8, which is always interesting.
And Donnie, with that being said, where can we find you, my friend? If the links are in the description, but you tell them, because some people aren't very good at clicking.
All righty. So if you go on YouTube, on Fourth and Long Media on YouTube, we'll have all of my Donnie's disposals, and then the connections to all of the AFL men's competitions. Once they're not actually in the Donnie's disposals, consist of interviews that I have done with journos, players, and supporters. And then I also do AFLW reviews as well on the Donnie's disposal section. And then there's the AFL stuff, which is Ross, the main host of the channel, does with me during the men's season. And then I'm also on social media, on Instagram and on Twitter, both at Coach Hess 40. Please reach out. I love talking with Carlton fans. I love talking with all footy fans, because I'm constantly wanting to chat footy. I'm on there all the time. I do supporter series during the off season, so I'm looking for supporters from all of the 18 clubs. I've got a couple. I've got one already in. I got North Melbourne. I think I've got set up. So I'm looking for Carlton, most of the Victorian teams except for North right now. I'm looking for somebody, but I'm going to let the Christmas holiday go before I go on that. So always willing to hop on here. I've been on the Blue Abroad, doing last year's season Swans preview. So I'm on there a lot.
He's everywhere, honestly, and he's well worth a listen to. He's, as you can see today, he loves his footy, and it's great to see, honestly. As a POM, it's great to see another non-Aussie take into the game as well, because sometimes you feel alone as the black sheep of the AFL family. So it's great to see that the black sheep are getting bigger. There's a few more of us.
Yeah, we'll eventually make a black sheep herd for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Donnie. Much love, mate. Everyone, make sure you go and check him out. He is fantastic and he's a great guy. And we'll see you next time.